Hello, and welcome to our presentation on how libraries are responding to combating xenophobia and fake news in the light of COVID-19. So an introduction to this topic, some definitions are of xenophobia, which is the fear or hatred of strangers, and going along with that, sinophobia is the fear or disdain of China or Chinese people. So a brief history of services, the CCNCSJ, which is the Chinese Canadian National Council for Social Justice. That's an organization that educates and engages for equity across Canada. And Stopping AAPI Hate, that's a national nonprofit coalition that aims to address anti-Asian discrimination, specifically amidst COVID-19. So some library contexts. Public libraries are more likely to be affected by both xenophobia and fake news because of the diverse population that it serves. It covers a wider variety of people and patrons. And in an academic library, employees have reported to be hired solely because of their heritage and not necessarily because of their skills, just to promote that diversity, despite the fact or regardless of them actually being qualified or not.
This timeline highlights a few important events in the history of Asian racism in Canada and some of the services that have been created to address these issues. Starting in the 1800s with the construction of the Canadian Pacific Railway, Chinese workers endured large-scale mistreatment. This was soon followed by immigration head taxes imposed by the Canadian government, specifically to deter Asian immigration into Canada, and this affected both Chinese and Japanese individuals hoping to migrate to Canada into the 1940s. In the 1980s, both the Chinese Canadian National Council and the Asian Pacific Islander Library Association were founded. In 2019, the CCNC was revised and reincorporated by a group of Canadian activists and former CCNC members. With the onset of COVID-19 in 2021, many organizations began to see an increase in Asian hate crime reports. In 2022, the CCNC reported at least 1,500 instances of racism in Canada. They noted that misinformation and racist beliefs related to the pandemic contributed to this surge in hate crimes against Asian individuals. It is important to note that this number is only one recorded number from one organization, and many other organizations that facilitate hate crime reporting have received their own numbers. So this number is not exclusive and represents but a fraction of total hate crimes in Canada and North America. Hate crimes against the Asian population increased due to COVID-19 pandemic-related misinformation. Several nonprofit organizations and projects now exist to help document and help citizens report these types of hate crimes. These organizations also provide anti-racism training and educational discussion content. There are some really great resources down below. Please check them out.
So, how are libraries implementing strategies and services regarding xenophobia and or fake news? So the first strategy we found came from the APALA, and they created the Asian American Racial Justice Toolkit, which provides in-depth training, real-life examples, and goals to be met by institutions in combating Asian racism. Strategy number 2 involves library collection development policies, and the practices are becoming increasingly diversified and inclusive to better serve minorities and to educate the public on non-white cultural experiences and racism. And finally, for strategy 3, the International Federation of Libraries has created a simple how-to guide for libraries instructing patrons on how to spot fake news, especially for COVID-19. For our local example, we found that EPL held a panel discussion addressing the racism faced by Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Some of the main points of the discussion were about capitalism. So Asians were widely treated by society as a labor resource instead of as individuals. They also discussed the model minority myth, classifying and assuming that all Asians to be studious is a dividing and reductionist view. They also talked about colorism and historical exclusion, colorism, others, individuals, even from their own cultures, and AAPIs have a long history of historical exclusion around the world and in Canada. And finally, they talked about how to be a responsible citizen. So those wishing to be a good ally should educate themselves on bystander training and remember to listen. Here are some resources we found regarding our topic. So first, in regards to professional development training, we found a book titled Diversity and Inclusion in Libraries, A Call to Action and Strategies for Success, and it describes the challenges that people face in their communities and workplace. It includes topics such as why diversity and inclusion matters, equipping the library staff, and voices from the field. For our adult nonfiction, we found this book titled Being Chinese in Canada, The Struggle for Identity. It's a historical account of the immigration head tax imposed on Chinese individuals to deter immigration following the completion of the Canadian Pacific Railway. For our adult fiction resource, we found a book called Obasan. Written from the view of a young girl, Obasan is a retelling account of experiences faced by one Japanese family following their immigration to Vancouver, BC during World War II. And for our child nonfiction resource, we found a book titled Fake News, which explores the history of fake news and how it's evolved, including how people and laws are addressing it today. And finally, for our child fiction resource, we found a book called Scary Bird, which is a fresh take on appreciating our differences and learning to embrace newcomers.